It finally happened. The noise stopped. The laughter cracked. The one who built traps in silence is now shaking inside them. Funny how pressure reveals the truth. Envy screams, hate collapses, and masks melt when reality bites back. You didn't chase revenge. You just stayed still, sharp, watching the mechanics turn. And now the snap echoes loud. This isn't victory fueled by rage. It's consequence. Cold, precise, inevitable. They thought the trap was perfect. Clean, invisible, built with smiles and patience, layered with small doubts, quiet rumors, gentle nudges meant to steer you off balance. That's how these minds work. They don't attack loudly. They whisper. They plant questions. They wait for you to doubt yourself while they sit back pretending to clap. And you felt it, didn't you? That tightening space around your confidence. That moment where the floor felt slightly tilted. They wanted you rushing, reacting, proving, explaining. Because traps love movement. Traps feed on panic. But you didn't move the way they expected. You slowed down. You watched. You learned the rhythm of the game while they were busy enjoying the illusion of control. Every setup has a flaw, and their flaw was arrogance. They believed they were smarter because they were crueler. They believed manipulation was intelligence. They believed patience belonged only to them. That's the joke. Real patience looks like stillness. Real intelligence looks like restraint. So while they tightened the strings, you adjusted your footing. While they waited for you to fall, you learned where the weight was shifting. You noticed how often they checked for your reaction, how their confidence depended on your discomfort. That's always the tell. People who truly win don't need witnesses. People who set traps watch them obsessively. And slowly, quietly, the pressure reversed. The ground they prepared for you started cracking under their own feet. A trap doesn't snap all at once. First it whispers back, small consequences, tiny reflections. Their words start sounding hollow even to themselves. Their allies grow distant. Their certainty wobbles. They feel it before anyone sees it. That unease. That cold realization that something is wrong. That the game isn't responding the way it used to. They push harder, lie louder, smile wider. Desperation always overacts. And then comes the sound. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a clean, mechanical snap. 'Cause meets effect. Intention meets reality. Everything they engineered to corner, you redirects. The narrative they crafted starts asking questions they can't answer. The proof they demanded turns toward them. The roles blur, then flip. Suddenly, you're not the target. You're the mirror. And mirrors are brutal. That's when the crying starts. Not loud at first. Internal. Private. The kind no one claps for. Because what hurts isn't losing you. It's losing the fantasy of superiority. It's realizing you were never chasing them. You were outgrowing the space they tried to trap you in. And now they're stuck there alone, replaying every move, every miscalculation, every moment they underestimated stillness. You see, traps don't punish strength. They punish obsession. The more someone invests in controlling another, the more fragile they become. They tied their identity to your downfall. So when you didn't fall, their structure collapsed inward. That's why it feels poetic, not because you planned revenge, but because you didn't. You let gravity do the work. You let time finish the argument. And now they're exposed to something they can't manipulate: consequence without emotion. No yelling. No explanation. Just reality standing there, expressionless, holding the receipt. They look at you differently now. Not with hatred, with fear. Because fear is what happens when the trapper realizes they were standing inside the mechanism the whole time, pulling levers that led nowhere, tightening a system that only knew how to close inward, watching the walls they built for you fold neatly around them, realizing too late that the snap they were waiting to hear was never meant for you, but for the hands that designed it, the mind that believed cruelty was control, the eyes that mistook silence for weakness, and the moment where power quietly changed direction without asking permission, without warning, without mercy, leaving them face to face with themselves, trembling in the space they created, unable to escape the sound of their own design snapping back. Again, and again, and again. Silence isn't empty. That's the first mistake they make. They think quiet means absence, weakness, confusion. They mistake your lack of response for lack of awareness. Funny, isn't it? Noise has always been their weapon. Opinions, accusations, side conversations, half-truths dropped like breadcrumbs, so others finish the lie for them. They thrive in sound because sound distracts. Sound creates chaos, and chaos hides intent. You didn't join the noise. You didn't rush to defend your name. Didn't interrupt the story they were so excited to tell. You let the room breathe. You let the echoes bounce back to the mouths that released them. Silence does that. It gives people enough rope to hear themselves. It forces thoughts to stand naked without applause. And that's terrifying for anyone who survives on reaction. They kept talking. Louder, longer, repeating themselves, polishing the same point until it lost its shine. You watched as certainty turned into performance. Every extra word diluted their authority. Every explanation exposed insecurity. That's the paradox. The more someone talks to prove power, the less power remains. Silence doesn't argue. Silence observes. Silence remembers. While they were busy narrating a version of you, you were watching them reveal themselves. Patterns emerge when someone feels unchecked. Contradictions slip. Timelines bend. Emotions misfire. The mask gets heavy. And still, you said nothing. Not because you had nothing to say, but because timing is sharper than truth. A blade swung too early just makes noise. They started to wonder. That pause, that unsettling gap where your reaction was supposed to be. Humans hate unanswered expectations. It rattles them. They replay their words, waiting for impact that never comes. Silence becomes a mirror they didn't consent to. And mirrors don't flatter. Others noticed. That's the quiet victory. People lean in when there's no shouting. They start listening between words. They feel the imbalance. One side straining, the other unmoved. Silence has gravity. It pulls attention without asking. And suddenly, the story doesn't feel so convincing anymore. They accuse you of indifference, of arrogance, of hiding. They don't realize those accusations are confessions. What they're really saying is, why won't you play the role I wrote for you? Why won't you react the way I need you to? Why won't you make this easier for me? Silence denies them closure, and denial drives obsession. You stayed calm while they grew restless. Calm looks like confidence when chaos runs out of fuel. Every pause sharpened the contrast. You didn't need allies shouting your defense. You didn't need explanations wrapped in emotion. You let consistency speak. You let time connect the dots they were too impatient to hide. Eventually, silence rewrites the hierarchy. Not dramatically, subtly. Power shifts when one side stops chasing validation. When you don't need the room to agree with you, the room starts questioning the one who does. That's when silence wins. Not by defeating noise, but by outlasting it. They feel it slipping. Control doesn't vanish loudly. It erodes. One unanswered message. One ignored provocation. One moment where their words land flat. They double down, thinking volume will restore balance. It never does. Noise is a debt. Silence is an investment. You didn't disappear. You were present in a way that couldn't be distorted. Your actions stayed aligned. Your pace stayed steady. And the more you refused to engage, the more exposed their hunger became. Hunger for attention. Hunger for reaction. Hunger for confirmation that they still mattered in your orbit. Silence doesn't humiliate. It lets people do that themselves. It gives them space to overextend, overexplain, overreact. It hands them the stage and turns off the applause. And when the lights stay on long enough, everyone sees the cracks. The trembling hands. The forced smiles. The exhaustion of pretending control. That's when they realize silence wasn't passive. It was deliberate, calculated, surgical. You weren't retreating. You were letting them walk forward alone. And now they stand there, exposed, surrounded by their own words, waiting for a response that never comes, listening to the quiet they underestimated, feeling the weight of it press in, understanding too late that silence didn't lose the battle. It never entered the fight. It simply waited, and waited, and waited. Envy never announces itself honestly. It dresses up as concern, curiosity, even admiration. It smiles too long, asks too many questions, watches a little too closely. They didn't hate you because you were cruel or loud or reckless. They hated you because your existence disrupted the story they told themselves. You became proof that effort could work without corruption. That confidence didn't need permission. That power could sit quietly, without begging for approval. And that kind of contradiction burns. At first, they studied you. Not to learn, but to measure. To find the cracks they were sure had to be there. Everyone has weaknesses, they told themselves. Everyone bleeds. The mistake was assuming your strength came from performance. They thought if they pulled at the right thread, the illusion would collapse. That's what envy believes. That success is a trick waiting to be exposed. So they mirrored you, copied your tone, borrowed your ideas, repeated your words with just enough distance to claim originality. Envy always wants credit without cost. But imitation carries tension. The longer they pretended, the heavier the mask became. You didn't need to confront them. You didn't need to accuse. You let consistency expose the difference between someone living their truth and someone borrowing a costume. Then came the subtle sabotage. Side comments, smirks, stories shared just out of reach. Envy is cowardly. It never attacks head-on. It poisons the room and waits for the air to do the work. They hoped doubt would stick to you. That suspicion would slow you down. That hesitation would make you smaller. But instead of shrinking, you stabilized. You became predictable in the most dangerous way. Reliable. That's when envy starts unraveling. Because reliability removes mystery, and without mystery, manipulation fails. They couldn't provoke you into mistakes, couldn't bait you into drama, couldn't drag you into explaining yourself. Every attempt slid off you and landed back on them. People began noticing the imbalance. Why was one side so calm while the other kept circling? Why did the one accusing look more agitated than the one being accused? Exposure doesn't come from revelation. It comes from contrast. You didn't reveal them. You simply stood there unchanged. And in that stillness, their behavior grew louder. Envy hates mirrors more than confrontation. Confrontation gives it an enemy. Mirrors give it truth. They started contradicting themselves, slipping timelines, overplaying concern, pretending to worry while secretly hoping you'd fall. And those micro-expressions, those emotional leaks, they don't go unnoticed forever. People sense insincerity the way animals sense storms. Not logically, instinctively. Something felt off. The energy didn't match the words. The darkest part of envy is that it believes it deserves your place. Not because it earned it, but because it wants it. Desire without discipline turns bitter, and bitterness leaks. It sharpens the tongue, shortens patience, distorts judgment. They began reacting to shadows, fighting outcomes that hadn't happened, competing with a version of you that existed only in their head. You watched the transformation quietly. Admiration curdled into resentment. Curiosity hardened into hostility. And through it all, you stayed intact. That's what finally exposed them. Not success, not failure, stability. You didn't need to win loudly. You just needed to remain yourself long enough for envy to show its teeth. When the mask fell, it wasn't dramatic. No confession. No apology. Just a pattern too obvious to ignore. The same person who smiled when you struggled went silent when you succeeded. The same voice that questioned your methods dismissed your results. The same eyes that watched you closely couldn't meet yours anymore. That's when the room understood. Envy exposed itself not by attacking you, but by reacting to you. Every move they made revolved around your existence. Every emotion traced back to your progress. And once seen, envy loses its camouflage. It becomes small, predictable, trapped in its own loop. You didn't celebrate the exposure. You didn't acknowledge it. You let it sit there, uncomfortable and undeniable. Because once envy is seen for what it is, it collapses under its own weight. It has nowhere to hide, no narrative left to sell, no illusion strong enough to protect it from the truth that it was never about you doing something wrong. It was about you doing something right in a way they couldn't replicate, couldn't control, couldn't stand, watching you exist without needing their approval, realizing that the darkness they projected was always theirs, pulsing quietly behind borrowed smiles, now laid bare for anyone willing to look, unable to retreat, unable to pretend, exposed by nothing more than your continued presence, steady, unbothered, and out of reach. Consequence doesn't rush. That's the lie they believed. That outcomes need anger, confrontation, a raised voice to arrive. They thought consequence was something you had to chase, demand, enforce. They mistook restraint for weakness and patience for fear. In their minds, nothing happens unless someone makes noise. And while they were busy manufacturing drama, consequence was quietly taking notes. Every action leaves residue. Every choice bends the future slightly in one direction. They ignored that. They lived as if moments were isolated, as if words dissolved after being spoken, as if intent vanished once hidden behind a smile. That's the comfort of people who've never had to face themselves. They borrowed confidence from the idea that no one was watching closely enough to connect the dots. But consequence doesn't need witnesses. It only needs time, and time is mercilessly honest. While they repeated patterns, manipulation shortcuts, small betrayals disguised as strategy, you stayed consistent. That's what separated the paths. One built on impulse and control, the other on alignment and restraint. And eventually, those paths stop running parallel. One ascends quietly. The other circles itself until it collapses inward. They laughed when nothing happened immediately. That's always the dangerous part. When people mistake delay for escape, they grow bolder, sloppier, more entitled. They start believing the rules don't apply to them. That's when consequence sharpens. Because arrogance accelerates exposure. It pushes people to overreach, to repeat mistakes louder, to leave fingerprints everywhere. You didn't remind them. You didn't warn them. You didn't point out the trajectory. You let them feel safe in their behavior. Safe enough to continue. Safe enough to dig deeper. Consequence prefers depth. The deeper someone commits to who they are, the harder it snaps back. Then it starts. Subtle fractures, not punishment, revelation. Opportunities dry up. Support weakens. Trust erodes. Not because someone plotted against them, but because reality adjusted. People respond to patterns whether they admit it or not. Energy repels when it turns toxic. Doors close without explanations. Conversations change tone. The room grows colder. They blame luck. They blame timing. They blame others. Anyone but themselves. Because accountability is heavier than consequence. Accepting cause and effect would mean admitting they authored their own downfall. And pride would rather suffer than confess. Meanwhile, you're untouched. Not protected, just aligned. That's the part they don't understand. You didn't escape consequence. You earned a different one. Stability, clarity, forward motion without resistance. While they wrestled with fallout, you moved through space that felt lighter, cleaner, unforced. The moment of realization hits them late. Always late. When excuses stop working, when patterns become undeniable, when the same outcomes repeat no matter who they blame. That's when the weight lands, not as rage, as exhaustion. The exhaustion of maintaining a false self for too long. The exhaustion of fighting reality instead of adjusting to it. Consequence doesn't scream. It doesn't humiliate publicly unless invited. It simply removes illusions. It takes away the leverage they thought they had. It strips influence down to truth. And truth doesn't negotiate. They look around for someone to argue with, someone to accuse, someone to drag into the mess so it feels shared. But consequence is solitary. No audience, no appeal, just a quiet reckoning between actions and outcomes. And that's when they think of you. Not because you did anything to them, but because you represent what they avoided. Self-control, discipline, patience. You become the contrast they can't escape. The reminder that another path existed and was ignored. You don't acknowledge their fall. You don't step over them. You don't slow down to watch. Consequence isn't your weapon. It's the environment responding naturally. And the most unsettling part for them is realizing you never needed revenge. You never needed justice delivered by hand. You trusted the system of reality to balance itself. Because consequence always arrives. Not on your schedule. Not in the form they expect. But precisely shaped to the choices made. And once it arrives, it doesn't ask for forgiveness, doesn't care about intentions, doesn't rewind for regret. It settles in quietly, permanently, wrapping around the life they built, tightening with every remembered decision, every ignored warning, every moment they believed they were untouchable. Standing there now in the aftermath, surrounded by results they can't argue with, can't escape from, can't silence. Realizing too late that consequence wasn't chasing them, it was waiting, and waiting, and waiting.